Hello, 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 everybody. This is Lord Captain Commander Dunn. I am very, very happy to be coming to you with this particular topic. I'm very, very excited to be able to chat about one of my favorite topics. But first, allow me to introduce my lovely and ever so talented guests. I have the one and only.
来世の試練よ。
Good evening, all.
We next have on our stream. What is this? Yeah. We have.
War! Good God, yo, what is it good for?
And we have one more guest here. Welcome to the stream.
I'm not here.
Yes, you are.
Alright, shoot. Well, yeah, StreamYards hopefully is going to be cooperative. We're kind of just going to jump right into it. We're just going to be talking about fantasy battles, fantasy and sci-fi battles, and what makes them good, what pitfalls can sometimes fall into, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of start off with kind of a little bit of an introduction, just kind of wait while it loads up. So kind of battles in fiction, kind of, I guess what we can kind of start out with is kind of differences and similarities, kind of just to kind of set some groundwork, I suppose. So the similarities that we came up with kind of before talking, kind of like, let's kind of go with the similarities first. So kind of right here we have organization, politics, tactics, strategy, intelligence, i.e. spies and stuff, morale, timing, terrain, cultural styles, and wind conditions are usually fairly similar across them. In terms of organization, like how would you kind of assign like organization? Talk about kind of the topic of organization within a fantasy battle.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a question to us, or are you explaining?
Yeah, that's a question to us. Question to everybody. Yeah. Sorry.
How would I assign it?
Yeah, or at least like kind of like well, I guess I'll kind of start. For me, like organization is kind of just mainly like rank and file versus the officers, kind of figuring out like, okay, who is in charge, who's going to be figuring out the battle strategy, and who is going to be working to complete the strategy of the higher ups. That's usually how, as well as like rank systeming. That's usually how like organization works in my mind.
Yeah, that's usually how it works.
Yeah, pretty rigid chain of command structure.
Well, it depends upon what exactly the organization is. So you can't really say what the structure of a group of people is unless you know what the group of people is. So it would depend. A group of bandits is going to be completely different to an army.
Well, that's true, but there's going to be organization no matter what it is, whether it be a group of bandits or a platoon of well-trained soldiers.
Yeah, somebody's going to be calling the shots at some degree.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. And kind of like going into kind of the organization, there's always going to be those elements of politics going into the thing. Like I think Drake, you were mentioning this as we were prepping for this. You talked about how like whenever somebody creates an organization where there's hierarchy, there's going to be some measure of interpersonal politics going on.
Yeah, so long as it's some manner of sapient species, whether it's humans, elves, dwarves. It's like, heck, I have a story where there's a lot of internal politics between dragon-like creatures.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to agree and disagree on different things. They're going to have different priorities. They're going to have different values. And all these sort of things can shape the way that war goes and how it goes, why it goes.
You can look at it in terms of a war or a singular battle, and that would have to be dependent upon the organization as well. So there's both inter and intrapersonal politics. So there would be politics between two opposing forces as well as politics within one organization itself, and that's going to propagate from the bottom. People are going to have to take into consideration the people who actually, the grunts or whatever, whomever, It's going to cascade down and propagate up, and then those are going to be in the middle and influence each other. So it's not just that the people up top decide something or the people at the bottom decide something. It's that those things affect each other, and that's based upon the organization and how well it's carrying out its tasks and of whom it's made up.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think Nihilus Nihilum had a very good point. The difference between organization between army and bandit groups or other is the scale, and I would actually agree with that. Usually bandit groups are usually small, unless they're like kind of a heavily entrenched thing. Like, have any of you heard the story of like this bandit king in Marco Polo's stories, where this guy actually had his own city and army that he could call on that would raid along the Silk Road?
No, I actually hadn't.
Yeah, the way that Marco Polo and his father ended up escaping from that was a bunch of other guys like just took off in fear and were kicking up a lot of dust, which led the bandits right to them. Whereas Marco Polo's dad, who was a smart man, had them walk slowly so that they could kick up as little dust as possible. And then once they were out of range, they were like, ride like your lives depend on it, boys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I would say is something that I will, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm putting that in a book.
Yes.
Need to
I
figure
might
out
have
where.
to use something similar myself somewhere.
Yeah. We also have like another thing that kind of is all battles will always include tactics, no matter what the setting, and it will always be a matter of, and that kind of ties into terrain as well, where you can utilize kind of tactics and strategy around the terrain and try and adapt your tactics to the terrain. Like, say, the Battle of Cynocephali, where the Romans were able to adapt better to the the hills because of their flexible formation, as opposed to the phalanx, which had a more rigid, harder to form up formation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
And picking your battlefield is a very good thing to do. And people always try to do it if they can. Like Leonidas and the 300 with that beach pass,
Thermopylae.
I believe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thermopylae.
Yeah, that's more strategy, though. And
Yeah.
tactics and strategy often get conflated in layman's terms, but there is a difference between them. Tactics is essentially what you do with what you got, whereas strategy is setting up to make sure that you can have as much as possible so that you have the resources that you need. Strategy is sort of the meta tactics. Think of tactics as the lower layer, more to the ground and what the average fighter uses, whereas strategy is what the general is thinking about for how to go about the battle as effectively as they can.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, a lot of it kind of like comes out with, I think one of the most interesting parts of like the Battle of Sci-Fi was the battle was actually won by a centurion taking his troops around the back, round through the gap between that had opened as some Macedonians pushed forward and some Macedonians were pushed back. And then he slipped through the gap and started hitting the Macedonian phalanx from behind.
Mm-hmm.
And because of their spears, they weren't able to do anything.
And no matter what setting you're in, the different battle strategies are almost always going to be applicable. Like a pincer movement, you can still do a pincer movement in space.
The universal is flanking, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. With regards to so go ahead.
And yeah, the high ground is always going to be important too.
With regards to real world application, there's a fundamental means by which U.S. generals are required to operate. It's called a MACU. Can't remember exactly how you spell it, but essentially it's like best practices for what you're supposed to do, the optimal thing to do based on what the terrain is, whether it's an urban environment, what the population is, and these such things. So part of the that would be considered a highly organized organization. But the interesting thing about that is in relation to a potential uprising or whatnot. So say, for example, you had ex-military members fighting against military members, they would be able to operate guerrilla warfare more effectively because they knew what the quote-unquote optimal decision is and could be able to plan their attack around that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And usually when you have good tactics and like a big part of like any battle is like morale. You gotta have high morale because if like it just kind of plays into it psychologically. If your army believes they're going to lose, they are going to lose because they are not going to fight very effectively.
Yeah. Your belief in winning has already won you half the battle.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it's more accurate to say that your belief in loss has already lost you the battle than belief in winning has won you the battle.
Yeah,
you can believe all you want, but if you're outnumbered 10-1, you're going to lose.
Yeah. Which is unfortunate. But even with those kinds of odds, you're more likely to, your side in particular, is more likely to win the battle as a whole, even if you lose your life within the first opening stages, let's say.
I would say the most micro scale on which that, like, about which I'm talking is, for example, you run into a lot of people when you're in martial arts that the topic just comes up that people are like, oh, if I got really angry, I know I could beat someone, or oh, I bet I could do that. And the thing is that people who are untrained fighters have no clue how inept they are in a fight. So
Yeah.
they can have all the confidence in the world, but they have literally zero clue what they are doing.
Yeah, which is what training is for.
And sometimes your win condition may be to put your opponents into that state where they're super angry and not thinking clearly and can essentially be dismantled at leisure.
Yeah, because if you're really angry, chances are you're not thinking anymore.
Well, my point is less so about the emotional side of it and more so about people not fully understanding their capabilities and or lack thereof. So
Well,
you can have all the confidence in the world, but a lack of competence is with confidence is going to be your downfall.
yeah.
Yeah, I would concur with that. Also, like cultural styles, like throughout history, there have been multiple different cultural styles that have been utilized throughout history. One of them being kind of like, I guess, like the difference between, say, Rome's way of fighting and the Huns' way of fighting. The Romans just kind of took territory gradually and created a like bureaucracy in the places where they were at, whereas the Huns just raided back and forth, never staying in one place.
Yeah.
And you can do that with two different civilizations, be they sci-fi or fantasy. Like if you have an orc nation, they're very warlike, where they just kind of go about for war's sake and war's sake only, versus, say, a human empire where they're trying to kind of do what the Romans did. Or if you have like a space pirates where they just want to hit and run, take as much as they can, much money as they can, stuff like that.
Well, the Huns didn't just do hit and runs strategically for because that was a cultural style. They did it because they knew that if people retreated into their castles, that they could attack their surrounding countryside, take the food, or burn it and harass them. And if you hide in your castle and your people, your population turns on you, then you're never going to win the war. But with regards to terrain, cultural style actually plays into that. So, for example, in the Middle East, back during like when that was a constantly changing stream of empires, like around the Assyrians and whatnot, it was just a constantly escalating stream of brutality because everyone could get in there and they could move very quickly through it. And it was kind of like the center of where all the civilizations were at the time. So it was kind of an escalating stream of brutality because they were like, oh, no one's going to fuck with us because we're just going to like be so brutal that no one's going to want to turn against us. Then the next empire comes in and is like, wow, these guys are pretty fucking brutal. We're going to have to be even more brutal in order to keep them. And it just kept going up and up.
Yeah.
I think of Vlad the Impaler.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Vlad the Impaler was
Not a good guy. He was a very terror tactic kind of guy.
Yeah.
A beautiful man with a beautiful mustache.
I suppose, if you want to call him that way.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Yeah. I think, and like, win conditions are usually similar. Sometimes you have the thing regarding, like, the Phantom Menace thing where you kill everybody and then suddenly you become, suddenly the,
Yeah.
yeah, suddenly the grunts go bye-bye.
Yeah. Sometimes it's take off the head of the snake. Sometimes it's rout the whole company. Sometimes it's you just need to get rid of the commander.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Fun little piece of trivia. Remember the Battle of New York in the MCU in Avengers 2012?
Yeah.
In the director's commentary for that, the one thing that Joss Whedon admitted to not liking about that movie was that plot point. Where as soon as Chitauri's mothership was blown up, every single one of them shorted out. He actually wanted to take it further, but for various reasons he couldn't.
Yeah. And, well, it's a valid tactic, so nobody was going to call him on it anyway.
Yeah, it's sort of an exaggerated version of real tactics where, like I was saying, headhunting is essentially getting rid of the leadership is a valid tactic, but it's not nearly as dramatic as like all the zombies crumble or all the Tyranids turn on each other or all the demons dematerialize or something of that nature. It's more that you take out the leadership and then everybody immediately breaks down into their own petty little squabbles and things just disintegrate and the battle becomes measurably less difficult. It's not over. You just have to go into cleanup mode at that point. When you take out the leader, you won, at least in that scenario.
Like, let's see. The Star Wars Expanded Universe did that, I believe. Where the warlords under Palpatine fractured, making it really easy to clean things up, at least until Thrawn showed up.
Yep. Shiny's here.
Yeah, we have a shiny. My comments are really out of date in here, but
it's literally like we
hey,
start talking
Shiny.
about Star Wars and he shows up. It's like
speak Star Wars and he appears. Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars.
It's like Shiny is Beetlejuice, except you say Star Wars 3 times. So, have we finished talking about the similarities?
I would say so, yeah.
Okay, let's move on.
Yeah.
Honestly.
That's the wrong one. I believe
dear.
differences is next, or would you rather...
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, weird ordering on my thing.
Yeah.
It's not okay, and I don't forgive you.
Yeah. Well, what can we do?
Yeah.
So... Oh, shoot.
Done. If it threw you off that badly, I can forgive you.
Oh, I just realized something unfortunate.
What happened?
I double booked myself by accident, but thankfully it was a movie night rather than a stream. So, and some people are watching the room. And
Oops.
It's fine. I completely forgot, and I am very, very, very sad. But what can you do? Yeah. Let's see. Oh. What? I thought it was... What? Wait. Oh. What? No, actually, it's like... Showcase thingy. It's not 5? It's a 2. Never mind.
So, of course.
Actually, never mind. I will be fine. Let's talk about differences.
Okay, so Of course, the levels of technology is going to be different. In fantasy, you expect to see more swords, axes, and spears, pikes, whatever you want to call them. While in sci-fi, you're more likely to see guns of ranging from, let's say, muskets to blasters and energy weapons.
Or crossbows and bows to blasters.
Yeah, crossbows, blasters.
Well, the
Yeah,
scale,
even
the scale would
Firefly
also
gunpowder.
change.
Huh?
So if you're thinking of handheld weapons, but the scale would also change. So
Well, yeah,
obviously artillery and the
we're getting to that. The scale is here. So
I wasn't in the planning yesterday.
yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
So it's fine. It's fine. So yeah. And where in fantasy you expect things like magic, in sci-fi you get tanks.
Okay.
So
Or just weird bits of different science that are functionally magic because they make just about as much sense. And
Yeah.
there's a trope I really like in sci-fi. It's colloquially referred to as Minovsky physics, named after the Minovsky particles that are essentially the science as to why Gundams work the way they do, and how Minovsky particles impacted the world and the technology there. The long and short of it is they have the ability to jam a lot of other technologies, and so it winds up shorting out a lot of missile-type weapons and tank-type weapons. So that's why the Gundams and the mobile suits reign supreme. It's because they get around that sort of stuff. And the way Minovsky particles tends to be incorporated into stories is that you get to have one break in logic in how your universe's technology works. And if you can do that and have that one break, it lets you basically essentially have your cake and eat it too, by allowing you to be creative and have fun with things while also still having that grounding to it. So it's a trope I really like.
On a completely different note, with regards to, I don't think that that fantasy inherently requires magic.
Yeah, like
you're more likely to see magic in fantasy.
I would
what I mean.
I would say that whatever
Like-
the rules, whatever rules have been bent to make it fantasy, to make it separate from reality, the technology would simply need to evolve based upon that. So whether it does or doesn't have magic, the technology needs to, and its application needs to reflect that.
Yeah. And yes, sci-fi does sometimes bring back melee weapons.
Yeah. And you can also, like, I think, like, actually a good example is actually, even though it's not like fantasy, Last Kingdom uses very, very good battle tactics.
Yeah.
In terms of like medieval stuff. Also, A Song of Ice and Fire is a good example of using medieval tactics and effective medieval tactics like pincer movements and such.
But not Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I was about to say not Game of Thrones,
reasons.
where everyone has swords, no one has shields, and everyone just charges into one-on-one melees.
Yeah, where one side has a shield wall. Talk about.
They did that from day one. They always had bad tactics and strategy. Well, not strategy, just bad tactics.
Yeah. Yeah, which is kind of annoying, but yeah, it is kind of like, fire arrows are not used to. Fire arrows are kind of dumb. Like, you have to, like, they're not, or at least like they're not lethal. Like a lot of people seem to think they are.
No, they're
They
not.
would actually be
Unless-
less lethal.
Unless they have
Yeah.
napalm on them or Greek fire, because both of those are sticky, and the only way to put the fire out is to use sand.
The one time that fire arrows made some sort of sense in Game of Thrones was when they used it to light the dragon
whites.
fire in the black water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anytime
Yeah,
you can light torches from a great distance away, and that's what makes it useful.
Yeah. But use it for anything else, and you had better put your arrows in, in either napalm, which is the modern version of Greek fire.
Or you have the what is it? An example maybe of a you know exactly where the enemy's storage is, and you just toss a fire arrow in there.
Yeah.
But didn't Mythbusters do, or someone did it, where they tried to get a fire arrow to light something, and the wind and even if the wind doesn't put it out, then the impact puts it out.
Yeah, which is why I said Greek fire and napalm.
Yeah, I would actually agree with that. I haven't seen that episode of Mythbusters. I'll need to find it on Netflix if it's still there.
With regards to quote unquote knowing where their resources are, I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it was I think it was Catherine the Great. Someone did this where they tied some sort of incendiary thing to a bunch of birds, and when they went to go nest in the people's houses, they would burn the houses down.
That's actually really genius. That is cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
Don't quote me on who did it, but I'm almost certain I remember that having happened in history at least once.
Would you like to know more?
You can do that.
You can also use biological warfare. In both cases, that's something we should have. You could use injections or pandemics in a sci-fi setting, versus you can kind of use dead animals to spread disease or rats to spread disease in a fantasy universe.
Yeah, and chemical warfare would be another thing too. I'm trying to think of that one chemical. I think it's called saltpeter. Where
yes,
it's essentially black powder.
Well, no, not that. It's one of the ingredients of black powder.
Saltpeter.
Saltpeter. Saltpeter. So when it's not a powder, it's fine. But if you have it as a powder, then everything can go up in flames because the heat gets it easy.
Well, once again, what this all boils down to is that the shit, I can't remember what I was going to say. It must not have been important. Is that the technology has to be derived from the rules of the universe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another MythBusters episode used tried to use reflection from the sun to burn
where they had the mirror shields, and they tried to.
And it's not that can't work. It's that it's not. You have to have a mirror so big that you can't really maneuver it unless
or a magnifying glass.
Yeah, because obviously you can set things on fire with a magnifying glass.
Yeah, my dad accidentally did it to a page of a book he was reading.
Oops.
Yeah, magnifying bookmarks, not always a good idea.
Yeah. I think actually one of my favorite tactics to use that people used was actually putting a horse that had been lying dead in the sun for a couple of days into a trebuchet and lobbing it over the wall.
Yeah, and pig heads and
Yeah. Other
corpses
disease-ridden
of people.
things.
Yeah.
So like, and especially like if you get lucky, somebody's got to clean that up, and the germs are going to get right on that human body, and they are going to spread. And even worse is if it hits the water supply.
Well, it's going to spread no matter what you do. So.
But they're going to give
Good
up
luck.
really, really, really quick. But it's like if the horse manages to go over the walls and splatter a little bit of its matter into the water supply.
Somebody poison the water hole.
Yeah.
Yep. All right.
With regards to sieges, real quick, one of the most underutilized sieges or siege tactics is augurs. I feel like augurs, whatever, being used is like, it's kind of a meme how it works. I don't understand why no one has done it. It seems like such a funny way to do siege. You guys know what an agar is? Agar?
Can't say I have.
You basically just once you've camped outside and the people are in their castle. Essentially, what you do is you just build a slope with like dirt up to their thing, and like each person is responsible for like bringing X amount of dirt per day to there, and then you get to like go about your business. So your entire army over time just builds a ramp up there, up the side of their walls, and eventually you get in. In fact, actually, one time.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Rome versus the.
It was a battle. I think it was Masada that they did something like that, where they built a ramp up the up the canyon slope to the place.
Yeah, that's.
And go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Neph, go ahead.
It was to the castle of one of the Jewish kings.
It was Masada. It was kind of just
Masada.
a rebellion.
Yeah, Masada.
And I know there happened to be at least one case where they built a ramp they built an agar up to the side of the wall, and then while they were doing that, people built a wall where the agar was going to be. So when they actually were able to use the ramp, they had already walled off the section that they were going to enter. So because it's easier to build 2D upwards as opposed to building a 3-dimensional slope.
Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest memes in history, I think.
Interestingly, I've heard variants of that tactics, and I keep seeing this. It's not really viable in real life for obvious reasons, but building that kind of agar out of like your own men's dead bodies. It's like you run up to the wall and then you die, and then somebody runs over you and they die, and eventually this pile of bodies just stacks so high that you just crawl up. I've seen that in so many different places.
Seems like that would be zombies or Warhammer characters.
Or Starship Troopers.
Something where the body is actually disposable as opposed to where it would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why the people actually getting siege don't think to just light the bodies, but.
Yeah.
Yeah. A tactic that I wish was used more often is burning pitch. Burning pitch and
water. Yeah. There are so many tactics that we use in real life that don't get used in pieces of fiction.
I feel like the dumping oil thing on people is kind of a silly trope that we've come to expect. Because oil is, especially back then, super expensive and super valuable. What they actually tended to do was to boil hot water with sand and dump that on. Because it sticks on them just as well, if not better. And it's also cheap as hell.
Yeah, but it's the same thing though.
Right, but it costs like 100 times less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they probably did the oil once and then
Yeah, or like,
tried to figure out
is-
how they could do it cheaper. Because as you said, Dunn, stuff gets done as cheaply as possible.
It's like the modern military. It's everything is built by the lowest bidder.
Yeah.
Yeah, and tunneling too. Tunneling, counter tunneling. It's stuff that we don't see anywhere. And I'm not really sure why. Maybe because people don't do their research or something? I don't know.
Maybe.
I think it's because people tend to write from what they have seen in film before. I think there's a large crop of writers these days who don't really research or understand anything. The only thing that they know is what like other movies they've seen. So they just kind of replicate what they've seen in the past,
Yeah,
as opposed to actually understanding some sort of subject matter.
Yeah, that's why that's one of the reasons why I enjoy TV shows like World of Weapons so much. Because they actually go into the weapons that were used and the tactics those weapons were part of as well. So, and while there's some sprinkling of, shall we say, PC, there's a lot of actual information that I can actually use if I want to use the weapons or the tactics I see in the TV shows. And I know to do my research anyway, so...
Alrighty. Let's continue to the next one. Leave it... Motivations, like, why are sometimes, like, would we write a battle, exactly?
Well, sometimes it's just a war story and you're going from battle to battle.
And I think, like, a good one is, like in a coming-of-age story, usually in fantasy, like, coming out of a battle is usually, like, the ultimate test of somebody's endurance and manhood, or, like, personhood, because it's this extremely traumatic and harsh event. Sometimes the story itself is not focused in on, like the after effects of the trauma, but in terms of the, like, it's usually like the culmination of an arc, usually, where you have and that usually is why setting. I would say, like, I'd actually like to hand this over to my guests for a little bit. Like, how can, like, and kind of like just like it's the setting that you are thrown into the story at a time of war, or it's like the theme is kind of just about human conflict, like how A Song of Ice and Fire is very much the story of how human conflict is, in the face of more pressing issues, is really petty and stupid.
Yeah. Another good example would be any of the Fire Emblem games. Because the story always starts in the middle of some kind of conflict.
Yeah, 40K, another big one, because does the Horus Heresy really matter when the Tyranids are going to kill everybody?
Yeah.
Or the Necrons are going to kill everybody, or whatever the Necrons are doing anymore, whatever. Or Orcs, or whatever the Dark Eldar are going to do, who knows?
I think that the reason why war in a even as a means by which to teach history. One of the main reasons why in World War II we talk about or why we focus on wars in history is because it's a really easy way to define what a civilization's resources are at the time, how they used them, and what they were willing to go to war over. So when you can see why two countries went to war, it's easy to get a very clear representation of what exactly their ideals were at the time and why they were at conflict and what the structure of their political, the makeup of their politics was.
Yeah.
With regards to why an individual or a character would declare war, it's an expression. Like, for example, we're going back to Game of Thrones. Robb Stark choosing to go to war, it's an expression of his character. He's not a warlike person. He's never been to war before, but you see how important his father and loyalty to his father is because he decides to go to war over that, even though it's explicitly pointed out that he's afraid of it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas some of the Lannisters would readily start a war, or what's his name? Littlefinger would readily start a war simply to further their self-interest.
Ambition. Yeah, their ambitions. I agree.
War also brings out the best and worst in people.
It's also how you found out that, for example, that Tywin Lannister, that the Lannister gold mines had run dry, and he was doing it to further his legacy, even though his legacy might not even be able to go.
Him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As well as but why he would choose to work with a family whom he loathes, because as Lady Olenna pointed out, that they needed them. They didn't have the soldiers, the wheat, the barley, the cattle in order to sustain the war.
Yeah.
Remember when Game of Thrones was good?
Remember when many things were good.
Yeah.
Or let's just make new good things and continue.
Yep. Yeah. Which is what we are trying to all do in one way or another.
Yeah.
I think power fantasy is what we are going on to next, though.
Yeah.
How much explanation does that need? If it's fun, you write it. Not everything needs to be super complicated. Just do it.
Yeah.
Or even deep. Sometimes you don't even need a deep thing.
It doesn't need to be deep. It doesn't need to be complicated. Sometimes you just want black and white.
Sorry, go ahead. I actually wrote a paper on this back in college. And I had to research about simulation theory and whatnot. So essentially, even if you if you represent a person by one ball representing the left hand, one ball representing the right hand, and one ball representing the head, a person can still pick out individualized actions. Like, for example, they tracked the person folding laundry, and when a person was watching the person folding laundry, they segregated it into X amount of actions, and they got very similar results when they watched the balls do it as well. They segregated them very similarly, and there have also been CAT scans that show when we're watching action on screen, it's activating the same centers of our brain. So, for example, when you're watching soccer, you're activating the same parts of your brain that are activated when you play soccer. So the act in and of itself is something that a human can recognize and identify with, even if there's zero depth to it.
Yeah. Nylum has a good point. There are many reasons why you can go to war, many of which are stupid, like the bucket war in Italy. That one truly happened.
Oh, wow.
I hadn't even heard of that.
I haven't either.
I'm not educated. What's the bucket war?
I have not heard of that one either.
I have no idea what that is, but it sounds hilarious.
I do know there was like the defenestration of Prague is pretty funny. Really.
Just for context, that sounds amusing.
Isn't
Yeah.
Yeah, that one
like a
sounds like it went
rebellion.
out the window.
Yeah, very, very, very hard.
yeah.
I think defenestration is one of my favorite words because it's such a classy way to say through out a window.
Uh-huh.
Very poor
Yes.
choice of words.
And then, well, I still have to pause and go, wait, what does that mean again? Oh, yeah, it means throwing someone out the window.
And he threw it out the window, the second story window, with a heaving hoe and a mighty throw, and he threw it out the window.
yeah.
I don't think I've heard that song in 20 years.
I don't think I've heard that one in 32.
I haven't heard it in a long time either.
I haven't sung it in 10 years or something. It's been a while.
It came right
but
back to you.
Yeah. But it works, I suppose. But it's like we have this moment in time where, like, just it's so ridiculous that just like they threw all of these officials just out the window, and some of them even survived. So it was ultimately pointless.
Well, throwing people out the window is also a good way to get your point across.
Speaking of people surviving falls from out a window, that's also a thing that bothers me about the way that most battles and fights in general are written. Is when a person's supposed to die, it takes one shot to kill them. When a person's not supposed to die, no matter any number of shots is supposed to kill them. And the whole concept of one shot killing a person is very bothersome to me, as well as one punch knocking people out every single time. People who are writing particularly seem to not really understand the application of force, and they don't understand that you can be shot in the head and still survive. You can even be shot in the head and run around. You can be shot once with a very low caliber bullet and still die. And just because you've been shot and you're going to die doesn't mean that you're incapacitated.
Yeah, and like you said, if you're shot with a 22, you have to the aim has to be just perfect, or else it's not going to do much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this last night, very briefly. There's a famous video that I know you guys know because I just talked about it last night, but there's a famous video that kind of defines why police officers empty so many rounds into a target. Usually people will be like, oh, why did you need that many rounds? And it's because there's this very famous video that essentially overnight changed the way that police officers think about how they fire at a subject when they're actually intending to do harm to them. And that's because, and there's many of them, but this is one of the more famous ones. A police officer had pulled a guy over, and I can't remember exactly how it happened, but the suspect ended up on top of the cop, and he was holding a gun in his face, and I'm going to fucking kill you. I'm going to fucking kill you. Cop manages to get him off and empties 5 .357 rounds into the guy's chest, thinking the guy's dead, and then he raises his arm to radio for help. The guy shoots 122, which is, by many people, it's called plinking ammo. It's like a toy ammo almost. That sneaks through his ribcage into his heart. Cop dies. Other guy is still alive today.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's also a video of a cop getting shot in the head, and he runs around for 5 minutes. People have been shot 9 times in the chest and still killed their targets. People have been shot once and died. You don't know how long the person is going to be able to harm you until the person is no longer able to harm you.
Yeah. So, yeah, just because it only takes one shot to kill you does not mean it's going to kill. I mean,
it might take only one shot to kill you.
Yeah, just because it might only take one shot doesn't mean it will, and it doesn't mean that you hit them and they go down. It's
lethal application
not
of
that
force
easy.
does not equal incapacitation.
Yeah, exactly.
And tasers work half the time, and pepper spray doesn't always work either.
Yeah. And plus, the tasers that the individual is supposed to use are very, very close range. And if you're in that kind of situation, you do not want to be that close.
All this is to say that if you're implementing some form of tool in your writing environment, you need to understand the application of the tool and when it does and doesn't work, and and exactly how it does work. Just like anything about what you're writing, you need to fully understand it before you make assumptions about how it works.
Yeah.
And if you do understand how it works, it might even be more interesting. How much more interesting would it be to kill 1 to 3 people in a realistic fashion as opposed to headshot or shooting 50 guys in the chest and they all go down and instantly are no longer a threat? It makes it feel less hollow. Wouldn't it be more interesting if it was more brutal and more realistic?
Yeah. It would be. Yeah. I'm just going to say yes to that. Because I don't think I can explain why.
And also because we're on a motivations thing and we've kind of gotten off track again.
Yeah.
Anyway, closing statements is that it's... shit, I can't remember what I was going to say again.
You're fine.
It's what I'll say lastly is that it's fine to have. I guess you can't say that it's inherently better to have it more brutal and realistic, but the fact that it's not applied is kind of silly.
Yeah,
it makes things interesting a lot of the time, but sometimes it's just not used.
Yeah. Of course. So are we finished with this part?
I would say so.
No, we need to get off topic at least one more time.
Alrighty. Now we're kind of getting into kind of my field of expertise. Like, fantasy battles are some of my favorite stuff to write, personally.
Yep.
Because you can have a various number of settings. However, I personally like the idea of kind of having like various different types of like terrains and settings. You can also use really interesting stuff like, per se, differing kinds of animals and creatures to your advantage when you're doing a fantasy book, because you can make up your own stuff to use that both sides can use as war dogs. You could even have animal-human species that you're using, like werewolves, vampires, that sort of thing, and try and figure out, okay, what's the applicability of these kinds of creatures in fantasy? And you can kind of like, the setting kind of very much depends on, are you doing like a high fantasy stuff? Are you doing a horror fantasy thing? Are you doing a low fantasy thing? Kind of like where it's kind of, or medieval fantasy, where there's very little magic going on in the actual warfare. Maybe there's a little bit, but there's not much. And you're continually trying to just try and figure out, okay, here are the like pieces of either humans or the orcs or dwarves, and figuring out how can I effectively utilize all of these characters together into an interesting whole. And usually with fantasy battles, you have a larger cast to use, whereas in a lot of other genres, it's kind of focusing on one thing. Sometimes you can focus on one person in fantasy, but it's much more interesting when you have like a wide variety of perspectives.
With regards to the what people use as their mounted units, there's even potential for, there are things like this that happen in real life, the potential for very, very small, minute things to become interesting. Like, for example, the fact that horses are afraid of camels. Like, there's a million possibilities. I mean, even in real life, there are some silly things that you wouldn't think.
And elephants are afraid of mice.
They really are. Like, that's not even a joke. They actually are.
Yeah. Mythbusters again.
Yeah. Is this just a Mythbusters episode?
Yeah, there's a Mythbusters episode about that.
No, I'm saying this podcast? Is this just the Mythbusters episode?
Maybe.
But yeah, like even the smallest change in how you, or the smallest detail that you decide to include, could be more interesting and have more ramifications if you pay attention to what it is that you're including. Like the camel example. Like, people wouldn't think to have something so minute be like a large factor. And for example, like horses being afraid of camels influences literally everything that would go on between a war where one side is riding camels and the other is using horses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, like if you, like say you were like against like what are they, Mamelukes?
I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not pronouncing that right, but yeah.
Yeah, where they're like these slave soldiers that existed in I believe it was Islamic culture, where they would ride on camels, and at least like in Age of Empires, they would throw scimitars. That's probably not accurate.
I can guarantee you that that's not accurate. It's another another example of pouring oil on people when you could use water and sand. In that scimitars are expensive.
Yeah. But yeah, Mamelukes, like, they would let me see. I'm actually look up, like, I haven't thought about Mamelukes in a long time. But yeah, you have, and usually like with fantasy, you don't use high-powered, high-tech weaponry. You usually like use more like swords, axes. Like, I think the highest technology with a lot of things is crossbows is usually the thing that people will go with.
Yeah, that's the feeling I get.
One thing I'll... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go on.
No, like, I'm gonna... Go ahead, you finish.
Oh, well, yeah. The crossbows you can kind of have in both. It really depends on what materials are being used for the crossbows. A crossbow in fantasy would be more likely to be made of wood with a bronze mechanism, whereas in sci-fi, it would be made out of something like steel or carbon fiber.
Or it could even be something like Chewie's bowcaster.
Yeah, exactly.
But with regards to the fantasy, one thing I will eternally bitch about is the insistence that everyone always uses swords and the complete disregard for spears and shields.
Yeah.
I think you mean axes.
But there's also the problem where not only is it just not accurate, but with regards to, like, for example, like, say it's like you're a monster hunter or something, everyone always seems to use a sword, whereas the point of a sword is that it's nimble and can move around very well because it's balanced at the hilt. You don't need a sword against, like, some big monster because A, it's probably not going to be strong enough to pierce whatever armor they have, but it's also, there's no need to have a nimble weapon against something that's too big to move out of the way.
And also, like, might even just not be able to, like, just has, like, such, like, big mass that you will miss.
Yeah.
It's its vital organs.
Like, go ahead.
Oh, like a kind of a good real-world example is, like, if somebody's fighting a bear, you want a gun that's got some good staying power, because a bear has a thick fur and thick bones.
Yeah, you don't want a 22 against a bear. You want a 45.
Or 58.
45 is not going to be big enough.
No.
Well, 45 at the smallest, let's say.
But, yeah. I mean, I would go with, like, an elephant gun, or at least 308 for a bear, but,
yeah.
Beside that, there's, like, it would be so much more interesting to me if people defaulted to, when like you're trying to kill a big animal, defaulting to something like dropping a heavy object on them or somehow getting them to fall, make themselves fall off a cliff.
A
as opposed to-
warhammer or something.
Yeah. Or like resulting to strategy and tactics as opposed to I'm just going to slice them with my sword and that's going to work every time. Or like The Witcher, where it's a silver sword and has special properties against the things that against which he's using it.
Mm-hmm. Or like when like you create a trap for the animal.
Correct. I mean, like how we used to kill mammoths, as we would drop heavy shit on them from a high place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or make
We
them
essentially
stampede
Looney
off a
Tunes
cliff.
them to death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in terms of use
the right tool for the job is essentially what I'm bitching about.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. That's kind of a. Hopefully a lot of good. Yeah, I think that a lot of people are getting like a lot of good stuff out of here. Since sometimes like just the thinking outside the box makes for better stories rather than going what has been done and done and done over and over again. Like that's why I really liked First Law, was because I saw that Joe Abercrombie was doing a lot of interesting and different things in terms of warfare as well as with characters. Like his most likable character is a crippled inquisitor who tortures people for his job.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least like his most charismatic. I would say his most charismatic character. Like he's got like good characters that are likable, but it's just Sandan Glokta is just such a great character, and I highly recommend reading the First Law just to read his stuff. Like Sandan Glokta is like, I only wish that I could come up with a character as good as that guy. But yeah, I think usually like a fantasy battle, like in terms of like its use in the story, it'll usually be at crux points in the story. I think like that's true of most battles, but it's especially so in fantasy, where most fantasy novels revolve around some kind of war happening. I have very, very rarely seen fantasy be not war focused. Have at least like epic fantasy, or at least as like the series goes on.
Mm-hmm.
It's a quick and efficient means by which to, not quick and efficient, but I don't know what the term would be. I'm gonna use quick and efficient.
Easy way to resolve.
Yeah, it's an easy way to show the resources, motivations, politics, and like get those to collide in a satisfying way. It's just kind of like the default because it's inherently built into the concept of warfare.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, and for those people who don't want to write it, they're just making things harder for themselves.
Yeah, because if you don't resolve it with a fight, whether it's a one-on-one or an army-on-army, it's going to be very, very difficult to try. It's going to be very difficult to try and find another way of resolving the conflict in your story.
Very much.
The object of war is not to die for your country; it's to make the other bastard die for his.
Exactly.
What's that red letter media quote?
That's
where
George Patton, but
you need the big stupid battle at the end, or however they phrase it. Don't have a battle simply for the sake of having a big stupid battle. Have a big stupid battle that's meaningful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It
like how Lord of the Rings has a lot of build up and character work before its battles.
And during.
And like they'll have character moments in the battle, like when, and kind of pauses, because just battle, it just gets exhausting. It's one of the reasons why Battle of the Five Armies is kind of the weakest of all the Lord of the Rings movies, because there isn't much there besides sound and fury.
I didn't like a single one of those Hobbit movies. They were all very. I'm I can't say anything nice about them.
That's fair. I like them mostly because the actors, but there are a lot of issues with the writing. I will not begrudge you that one. That is actually very fair.
My favorite part of the first one was all the fart and poop jokes that the actors did.
Oh no. Juvenile humor where it's probably not needed.
Bilbo has a message for Smog the Dragon about his mother.
No. Oh no.
Thank goodness that doesn't happen.
Yes. Thank God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, they do tend to be on foot. It's very, very rarely that you have a battle happen where, like, it's cavalry or elephant.
How dare you make us get back on topic?
Yeah, cavalry battles I thought were more common than that.
Cavalry
You
is
would just
typically
think,
I'm
wouldn't you?
familiar with.
Cavalry is typically a specialized unit. It's kind of like saying I thought everyone fought with tanks nowadays. The tanks
Yeah.
are a unit that around which you can build strategy and tactics, but it's not the entirety of your military.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, love fantasy battles. Example being a king having a basilisk chained to the castle wall, killing all who see the monster. So the attacking army have to figure out how to kill it or get around the monster. Yeah. And with fantasy battles, a lot of things become viable that would not be viable in real life because you have animals and such that can do things that no real animal can do. So you can have flying cavalry that have Pegasi as mounts, or griffins, or wyverns, or dragons, and all of those animals are cool.
Or even small details that change the way that things works, like even the introduction of wildfire to Game of Thrones, or the introduction of obsidian to other stories, or just small changes affect the way that the rest of the battle takes place, because now there are properties that the equipment or the people have that wouldn't be there otherwise.
Yep.
Yeah. And like that kind of brings, like, you could, like, in various, like, kind of one of the similarities that I think, like, Drake brought up is basically that when you have like, kind of the similarities between sci-fi and fantasy is basically like just whether organic or non-organic, where, like, for example, like a dragon would be a fantasy world's equivalent of like a starfighter or something like that.
Or something, yeah.
Yeah.
I actually think I disagree. I think there's organic sci-fi and there's inorganic fantasy, like steampunk for fantasy, and like the Talaxu from Dune.
That's true.
And After Earth, while it's a terrible movie, also kind of had an interesting design to its spaceships, where it was like some sort of like cloth fiber and like a honeycomb fashion, where everything always tends to be gunmetal gray, Starship Troopers, Halo sort of looking everything, but to make it, like, we always assume that it's going to be technology that brings us to the future, but if it were, for example, biology that brought us into the future, it'd be a completely different spin on the way that we think about futuristic technology.
That's true. And the terrain can be different too. Mushroom forests as one such example. Then you have to figure out what the hell you're doing there. and how you can use the mushrooms.
Or if your magic is based on some kind of mind resource.
Yeah, that too.
So, like, again, that gets into the sort of the fantasy paralleling sci-fi sort of thing, where fantasy might have a magic rock that is essentially plutonium.
Yeah, basically.
And yeah, spears. Sword is often a backup sword weapon for a rider. Like usually a weapon.
Yeah, usually they used pikes or spears. Yeah.
My understanding is that pikes weren't really popularized until gunpowder existed, because you basically just used it to block off sections, whereas it was mostly 7-foot spears and shields. And there's actually a really weird thing. This is, I think I'm the professional off-topic guy. There's a really weird phenomenon where an 8-foot spear is too difficult to use with one hand, no matter how strong you are. But 7-foot, almost everyone can use. Don't know why that is, physics or something, science, but it's
only a foot.
If you've ever tried it, it's a really, really strange phenomenon.
Biochemistry.
Yeah, or something.
Science, bitch.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I think like one of the next bits is usually where it kind of becomes a little bit more interesting. The challenges.
Yep.
A lot of the time it's the same setting over and over, giant flat plain where two armies just smash into each other, or it's a castle siege. Very rarely is there innovation, I guess you could say. Why would you guys say that is?
Maybe because
it depends on like what the media is. Like if it's a game, you definitely want to structure the way your game works around a standard pitch battle because it's fair. Now in real life, you don't do that because if you're stupid enough to fight a fair fight, you deserve to lose. But if you're in a game, you want it to actually have things level enough that one side isn't immediately advantaged too far. So that's why you might want to do that in like a tabletop game.
I mean, like in terms of like just a fiction game. Like I mean, like fiction.
Yeah.
Like
I would say that the primary reason is that people are writing from other works that they've seen rather than having a fundamental knowledge of the subject matter that they're seeking to implement. So that's the reason why everyone just wants to rewrite Lord of the Rings. They want to make another Lord of the Rings, or nowadays another Game of Thrones, but that's because they don't have a deep enough knowledge set to come up with something new.
That's
because
probably,
they don't actually understand the inner workings of what actually went into making up those new worlds and environments and
yeah, it's like they understand the trappings, but they don't understand why the trappings were there in the first place.
There you
go.
They don't look to actual history a lot of the time.
Yeah, which is probably one of the reasons why we don't see a lot of trench warfare or tunnel warfare going on in fantasy or even sci-fi settings. It'd be interesting to actually see some other things used other than, oh, we're out in the open.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Lord of the Rings did it, but we don't see it anywhere else, really.
Yeah. Like, one kind of... I think that, like, one thing that I tried to use in a few of my battles was actually stuff like the Battle of Hydaspes, where it's not a pitched battle on a field. It's actually both sides have to figure out how to utilize the river to their advantage or get around the river as an obstacle, which is something that I just haven't seen very often.
I'm not afraid to put my people in forests where they have to be quiet.
Mhm.
I would say one of the ways one can make a fantasy setting or any sort of like setting in general, but we'll stick with fantasy warfare, is focus on smaller things that need to change. Like, don't just think about like, oh, I can make this big pitch battle different by adding a million horses or dragons or whatever. It's like Vietnam was so difficult because it rained all the fucking time.
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
it's
Or
like
Agincourt.
what makes the grunt unhappy? Think about those things, or what would make a grunt happy that gives them an advantage.
Yeah. That's what you want.
Yeah, oftentimes, yeah, a dragon is usually used as usually the only way to take out a dragon is basically like the medieval equivalent of anti-aircraft weaponry, like ballistas or stuff like that,
Yes.
or another dragon or another monster that is like a dragon.
Or get
Or
them to
if the
land.
dragon rider kind of forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It took me a second to realize what you said.
One of the worst gaffes of all time. They kind of forgot.
It's like sometimes it may not always be that way. I mean, where is the rule that says that dragons have to be these big, huge freaking things? Why not have dragons of different sizes? Why not have like a Charizard size thing where it's only about as tall as you are, and it's just like a
Charizard is
orc
5'2".
There's
or something like that.
There's
Yeah.
also there's a Magic the Gathering card that called it's like Rakdos Pit Dragon or something, where it's essentially a large sentinel lizard, obviously like dressed up to be horny and badass because it's like a magical creature, but it's essentially just a large sentinel lizard.
Yeah. And then there are the dragons in How to Train Your Dragon. Why can't we have more settings where dragons are like that? I mean, maybe not like cats, but with all the different shapes.
And can't remember what the painting is, but where Saint whatever is killing the last dragon is like
St. George.
St. George, that's who it was. The last dragon's like tiny. It's kind of like the Game of Thrones saying its head was no bigger than an apple.
Yeah, we also I think like another like and various types of dragons, like not just fire breath but ice breath or acid breath or something like that.
Mhm.
Or no breath.
Or maybe no breath, like a constrictor.
Yeah. Or even like it's just doesn't have wings. It's just like a large
Chinese.
multi-legged lizard.
Chinese or Asian dragon.
Kind of more like just imagine like kind of like the stereotypical view of a dragon where it's got four legs and two wings, just sans the wings. And it's just
Oh, it's like what I like to call ostrich dragons.
Yeah.
I think those are called wyverns.
No,
No,
wyverns
have
are
wings, they just don't have front legs or something like that.
no.
yeah.
Wyverns don't have front limbs. They have 4 limbs, 2 wings, and 2 hind legs. That's wyvern.
I thought that's what we were describing. He said
Well,
ostrich dragon.
No.
No, wyverns fly. Ostrich dragons are more like, if you know what the carnosaurs are in Warhammer Fantasy.
I thought
basically those.
I've never seen any Warhammer, but aside from those YouTube videos, but
I love calling
when you said
carnosaurs
ostrich dragon, I thought you
dragons.
meant that like it had no arms.
It basically it can't fly.
Yeah, I got it now. I realized I was dumb, but
Yeah, for a good example of dragons versus wyverns, the Harry Potter book, Goblet of Fire, actually. Those dragons are wyverns. They're not dragons.
Also, why does everything have to be dragons?
Yeah.
Because dragons are cool.
Giant
also-
bears.
Ugh.
Giant, or even like a lot of other things like chimeras are not very like often represented. Probably because like in mythology, chimeras were nasty.
Yeah, chimeras. Not to mention sphinxes.
Yeah, sphinxes are usually like kind of more like are not really like battle creatures. They're more like
Tricksters.
Tricksters, intellectuals, usually like guardians of a specific place, not like things like an attack dog that you would use.
Yeah, sort of
Right.
based on the riddle of the Sphinx. From
Right, but
Oedipus.
all these
Yeah.
creatures are based around implementing pre-existing creatures, whereas what could be the case is where someone creates their own creature that its abilities are tailored to the themes or requirements of the
Or
setting.
the terrain, or even the terrain. Like an example is actually Brandon Sanderson's Chasm Fiend, where it is basically a dragon, but what it is, it's an 8-legged crustacean style dragon that doesn't have any wings that goes through the slot canyons of this specific area of the world. I might have a picture of that somewhere. I'll have to show it at the end of the stream or something.
Yeah.
But
there's also like the sandworms of Dune.
Yeah, those things.
Where
Ugh.
the entire reason that the people were there is for the spice melange, but the spice melange is capable of mutating things. For example, the sandworms, and it also made it more difficult in turn to harvest it. So it's stuff that's cascading or propagating and feeding back into itself as to why the creature design and the world design is the way it is.
that also makes me think of that a lot of the time the motivations for battles are not very interesting usually. Like sometimes you don't really do like resource warfare in fantasy. You do it a lot in sci-fi, but you don't do it a lot in fantasy. That's one thing that I probably should put up there, that like motivations are sometimes like lacking, where it's usually like, oh, you killed my dad, now you must die, or
the kill everybody. That's one that just really bugs me from a tabletop gaming perspective, because it's such a lazy way to do a fight. Very rarely is that the kind of fight that anyone would actually try to go after, because actually trying to get 100% casualties on the other side, one, is going to result in a lot of casualties for you, and two, is probably not going to do as much good as like 30% casualties, but you actually accomplish an objective.
It's also very difficult to stop people from running away.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Nick Brown actually had a good point. Like, the terrain can fight back, which is an interesting idea to play with. Like, say, like maybe you're forced to fight in a place where it has limited gravity or something.
Or
I was thinking
like,
something more like acid rain.
mm-hmm.
Because like Ints, I would classify them more as like a neutral party suddenly getting involved.
Yeah. Like, I guess like an example that I was thinking of was like, say like you are going into an area where it's like a bunch of rocks, and the rocks will float up and down, and you have to kind of plan your strategy around the floating rocks that just kind of move up and down. And you have to figure out like how this enemy strategy is going to go, and you have to move your army in order to counter them, almost like it's you're moving pieces on a chessboard.
Yay,
Okay, I guess that's what that is. I had not thought of it that way. I will. I just had that idea because like Shad Brooks kind of does that with like his continents. He doesn't use it in warfare, but like he has them. What is it? Like he has like almost like a ring-shaped planet instead of a spherical planet.
Yeah.
And who here has read his book?
I have
talking about
not.
Ringworld?
I want to.
Nope.
Yeah, The World. Yeah.
I have not read it. I think it's on one of my shelves somewhere.
Oh, it's very good starter. I thoroughly enjoyed it when I first read it, and it's still I need to reread it again. But it's like, dang, that was a good time. That was how I felt about it.
With regards to terrain, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it. I was done.
With regards to terrain, again, there's a bunch of memes with regards to how battles actually took place in historical settings. Can't remember what it was. I think it was one of the wars between England and Scotland, one of many. The English were crossing with their cavalry across a bridge, and like if they were to meet these cavalry out in the open, they would have easily gotten killed. But what they did was, since it was muddy on the other side of the bridge, they waited for a third of them to cross and then just started pulling people off their horses when the horses got stuck in the mud and just fucking them up.
Dang. Good strategy.
There was also
bridges, mud, and rain are all a pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, also like digging small holes into the ground. That'll really screw up a cavalry charge because your horse will trip and break its leg.
Yeah. Or caltrops. Those are bad too.
Now, what are caltrops exactly? I know they are in a futuristic sense, but
those
they're basically
are
pieces of metal. They're like a tripod piece of metal with kind of imagine like a tripod with a spike up extending out of the middle.
They are those things that the police use to stop cars. That's what those are.
Okay.
The Romans, when they were first employed, the Romans made them with barbs on the end. And they were called something else, but I can't remember it off the top of my head.
Okay, so it is basically what I was thinking of. It's sort of the same sort of stuff in futuristic settings. So
Yes.
That is the same idea.
I would think that it would be cheaper just to dig holes in the ground.
The caltrops are, I think, the only piece of weaponry, well, not piece of weaponry, the only tool that has not changed significantly since we started using them.
How about a knife?
Well, maybe not a knife either, but I said it's one of the tools that has not changed significantly in all the time we've been using it.
Yeah, surprisingly, it actually got more relevant considering what it does to tires.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah.
The way we use caltrops to stop tires is actually pretty different nowadays. You more so lay it out as a belt so that when the car drives over it, it doesn't take the caltrop with it, because if a tire runs over a caltrop, it's going to get stuck in the tire and it's going to leak a lot less effectively.
And they're also, I believe they're hollow nowadays, too. So, there's that.
Yeah.
Wasn't this a discussion about fantasy battles?
Well, it is, but well, if
also
you
like
have,
there's also like you could use kind of stuff like this as like an obstacle where kind of one side has an entrenched position. Like mostly it's just like you don't really see where somebody has an entrenched encampment where they just stick stakes into the ground and try and make like a palisade and a spike moat or like other obstacles around their camp rather than going out and trying to attack the enemy.
Yeah, you don't see that. You just don't. It's why. I want
Yeah.
more Kraken representation. Darn it.
All right.
That's applicable to seaside warfare.
Yeah, and I think that I think like we've kind of talked about most of like the fantasy stuff. Let's chat about sci-fi and sci-fi characteristics. Drake and Brent Discord, take it away.
Yes, please.
Wait, why me?
Okay. That's
Well, it's
because
just
they're
like-
the fantasy experts.
Well, I don't
Yeah,
know
we're-
anything about anything, so
Are you sure about that?
You know nothing, Brent Discord.
go ahead, Drake.
Anyway, first up we got range and ammo. Dunn was mentioning this earlier in terms of the fantasy stuff, and that one of the oft overlooked issues of fantasy warfare is preparing rations. Sci-fi battles, and this is largely because sci-fi battles are essentially accelerated modern battles with lasers and stuff of that nature, is that those battles tend to be really, really short. They'll end very quickly and kind of out of nowhere. And elephant in the room, guns are a thing. And when you have guns being a thing, you can kill people from further away, but it changes. It doesn't remove melee entirely. It just changes what melee does. When you try to engage in a melee conflict when ranged weapons dominate, it's because you're trying to suppress the melee weapons. Melee in a fantasy setting would be more of your actual workhorse, whereas in a futuristic setting, it's a stop shooting at me because I'm right in your face with a knife and I'm about to stab you. And when you're the guy with the gun in that scenario, your objective is to either A, meet him head on, or B, make distance.
What was that last bit about guns versus knives?
When somebody gets in your face with a knife in point blank, what they'll tell you when you when you're contemplating carrying, concealed, or open, is that you have about 5 yards, 3 seconds, and 3 seconds to incapacitate your target.
Yes.
Without that, you're going to need to make some space.
Yeah. The rule that I always heard was 21 feet, I believe, 20 yards actually. But yeah, that's more with regards to one-on-one combat, and that's having to draw it from your hip. Whereas I thought what we were more so referring to was in a battle. I don't think I would fear anyone with a knife if I had any sort of firearm if we're in a battle.
Yeah, because we're that's the thing I'm also going to get to. Because of how modern battles work, let's take like a battle in the Middle East, about 10 years ago or so, versus something like a siege of a castle. They're not going to be fought in the same way. You're going to have way fewer guys, way better armed, and they're mostly going to be moving around the terrain looking for targets. It's mainly just a game of target acquisition. Like, it's
Capture the flag.
Capture the flag or get to someplace else. I kind of wish we talked about this more in the fantasy section, because a kind of battle I really like to see in fantasy is like the breakthrough, which can have a lot more impact in a sci-fi modern setting, because it's far easier to break through with fewer people. That's why you don't have like 1,000 Marines just storming into a place and just marching through, mowing things down. No, you're going to have like a squad going through and clearing rooms and basically being the eyes in the back of each other's heads. You're going to move through much more methodically rather than just march and stomp. Which is a lot more viable in a fantasy setting, because fantasy settings don't tend to have automatic weapons, which sort of killed that in real life.
There's also kind of the limitation of like you have a higher variety of settings that you can do in a sci-fi universe because you have space and spaceships.
Right.
And different planets.
What I was going to say is that you have here like range ammo tech, vehicle warfare. What this boils down to me is once again viewing the manner in which the combat would take place as an outcropping of the tools that they have. So, for example, if we're talking about a space battle, one example would be like the battle in Fall of Reach, where it kind of highly reflects kind of how the pike and shot era was, where essentially you're more so just kind of daring people to get close enough. But so, for example, in Fall of Reach, the Covenant had this dreadnought that had longer range and everything, and was basically able to occupy space. So it's less so about like what is required and more so about what makes sense for a faction, to what kind of tools they have and in what kind of environment they're operating. So like you said, yeah, it might be clearing houses, but that doesn't inherently, that transfers to that location at that time with those tools. So
or clearing out like a spaceship or something like that.
So that would be a closed quarters battle. So you need a tool that operates in that environment, and you need not just a tool, but the people who use the tool to be in a structure that fits that environment. So you could easily plop in tactics from house clearing, like from modern SWAT tactics. You can plop those in there, and you can exaggerate them based upon the technology available. So, like for example, those what's Drake? I'm sure you know what's that animation on YouTube where the guy basically just made this Warhammer thing in his basement, like it's like a one guy show.
Made what kind of thing?
It was like a Warhammer thing where like the Space Marines were like storing some sort of it was like an animation. It was really famous. He just finished it recently.
Oh, yeah, Astartes, I want to say?
Yeah, that thing. So, for example, you can exaggerate room clearing tactics because if you have armor that reflects certain things, or if you can run particularly fast, or if you have these augmentations to your capabilities, then you have to modify the way in which you operate because the tools have changed.
Mm-hmm. And I think where a lot of that comes from is, once again, like how the nuclear weapon changed warfare. Because once the nuclear weapon happened, a few things happened. The nuclear weapon, the rocket-propelled grenades in general, and how the automatic weapon essentially eliminated anything but trench warfare in World War I. And basically made it so Napoleonic battles don't really happen anymore. That's why I think that's the way a lot of battles are fought anymore, because the way technology has evolved has really made doing anything else really stupid and suicidal.
Yeah.
I don't know if RPGs in particular contributed to that, more so just the presence of automatic weapons and of
automatic
armored vehicles and whatnot.
9% of it.
Yeah.
The funny thing about armored vehicles is that tanks actually came into existence and became obsolete, relatively speaking, fairly quickly. Because it's like in World War II, you had a lot of battles that were largely comprised of tanks and maybe the occasional operator outside of a tank, but mainly it was tank on tank. Like you had T-34s versus... shoot, I used to know this off the top of my head, but you know what I'm talking about. Especially on the Eastern Front, you had a lot of tank versus tank battles. You don't really have that anymore because a giant column of 20 tanks just screams, "Nuke me."
Well, you're not going to nuke them. You're more so probably going to do an airstrike on them. Yeah. I don't think a nuke has actually been used in combat.
Not like that.
Yeah. So that I'd like to kind of talk about three distinct things that kind of makes me think about. So the first one is the we don't use battleships anymore. Battleships basically don't exist. And that's because of the inception of aircraft carriers. So a certain piece of technology completely changed the way in which we do combat. So rather than being able to this is the greatest battleship ever, it can shoot 26 miles accurately. Rather than that, it's like, no, now we have an aircraft that can take off and kill something 500 miles away. So instead of using battleships, we use smaller things like destroyers that are specially equipped to take out submarines or sweep for mines, or to they have a bunch of different purposes, but it's called a carrier group is what we use now. We literally just there's no purpose for a battleship these days. You don't need something that big with that much firepower, because what are you even going to use it on?
Yeah, it's a bullet magnet.
Yeah. And
metaphorically speaking, not literally.
What were the other two? There was another one. So in Jarhead, another way in which technology completely changed the way that the battle is done. There's a line from Jarhead that I think of where the whole point of Jarhead is that the Marines never get to kill anything. They're trained to be killers and they never get to kill anything. So one of the soldiers said something along the lines: "If you see those aircraft, by the time that we can move a mile in this desert, the war's going to be 1,000 miles down the road." So they kind of have to deal with this conflict of they're not really useful anymore, at least as in terms of fighting. They're more so just boots on the ground to occupy space, as opposed to actually even being able to do anything that they're trained to do. And the final one, I can't remember what the final one was. It must not be important.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of the stuff that we were touching on, the high tech, that's kind of vague, vehicle warfare, the power and number disparities. Whenever anybody is talking about sci-fi battles, fun fact, the actors who played the Marines in Aliens, the director had them all read Starship Troopers beforehand, the book. And Starship Troopers, I think that was a pretty good guess as to sort of ultimately where our warfare technology is going to eventually go, provided the resources and the power behind it. In that, unlike the movie, where it's basically just grunts with rifles running around and firing abreast, in the book, it's actually a squad of 3 or 4 guys. You see this in the first chapter, where Juan Rico and his compatriots are basically just hopping a mile-long assisted jumps and dropping the occasional nuclear grenade, just to sort of make a point and wreck this place that they're attacking. And the point of that is that because you have these mobile suits that are so much better than any other single combatant in the entire galaxy, in the entire Federation, because of that, you can have these enormous fights. A lot of fantasy battles would largely come down to just who brings more men and who can use those men more effectively. But in sci-fi battles, that largely can go straight out the window. You can demonstrate that thing and have just one guy taking on 1,000 enemies, 10,000 enemies, and still feasibly come out the other side, because the way a lot of tech goes is that technology tends to take things that we already have and make them smaller. And that can largely apply to weapons as well, as a fairly plausible prediction.
I think what you said about power armor, for example, could also be applied to fantasy via the use of magic or harnessing large creatures and whatnot.
Yeah, but you never really see that, though.
We're not talking about what you do see. We're talking about what you could see.
It's done. Are there any versions of fantasy super soldiers that aren't the Sigmarines?
Gandalf.
That aren't I would Gandalf more as
The Witch
It's
King.
a sniper.
Sauron.
I guess
Or a
an
full-
example might actually be in Wheel of Time. There's an elite group of assassins called Blood Knives, and their purpose essentially is to be suicide. They are the best troops, but they are suicide troops. They are committed into battles in order to ensure that after the enemy goes, you drop the blood knives down and they just kill as many people as they can, especially leaders.
Yeah, that seems more like a living grenade. The difference between that and, say, a Space Marine is that when the Space Marine is done, the Space Marine gets to come back and then do the same thing somewhere else.
Well, kind of the thing with them is they get a Terangriel or a special magical device that gives them super speed, strength, and the ability to blend into shadows. But the price of that is that they get slowly die because of it.
Right. But the thing, Drake, the term that you're looking for is it's called a force multiplier.
Yes.
What that basically refers to is the ability for a single person or single unit or tool to be able to apply a significantly higher degree of force without any additional effort. So, I mean, dragons can do that, wizards can do that, but I see what you're saying is that it becomes commonplace and doesn't inherently require any special skill. It's whereas in fantasy, it's like something special to have a force multiplier. It's like it's either a special person or a special creature or something magical. Whereas with in sci-fi, it's more so a thing that anyone can be given and reasonably be able to use it.
Like it's usually a piece of tech, usually.
Yeah.
Like
sometimes it bonds with a person. Like if anybody here has seen Titan AE, that's an example of like tech being bonded with a person, or at least like a map being bonded with somebody's genetics.
Is that the animated movie from like 2000?
Yeah, I believe
no, I've
so.
not seen that.
It's Don Bluth 2D animation. It was the thing that finally sunk his studio.
It sounds like a familiar movie, but I don't think I remember anything about it because I was too young.
Basically, Earth gets blown up and humans become a refugee society. In the first 5 minutes.
That's also the thing. Technology doesn't inherently have to amplify the capabilities of humans. It could actually, or of the society that uses them. It can also take it away. So, for example, post-apocalyptic is still technically sci-fi if you think about it that way. So, nukes can take away your ability to utilize your technology. The Earth blowing up could take away the same thing, and
you mean like
essentially
EMPs?
turn you into nomads. Yeah, there's a dozen means by which you could limit the capabilities of a society by using technology to take those things away.
Or if technology can be used to take magic away. Because, hey, this is just because this is sci-fi doesn't mean magic doesn't exist. Yeah. And you often have them clashing against each other because they come from different sources.
Right. So the primary consideration, is ultimately, the themes are affected. So the tools and all these sorts of things are means to an end, and that end is character development, themes, and all these sorts of things. And those can be and if we're looking at this through the lens of character battles, obviously the way in which the tools are used has to affect the way the battles take place, and the battles taking place are controlled and reflective of the characters and their motivations. So ultimately, the themes are going to come as a natural conclusion to those things, and it would be a good idea to plan those and construct them or let them grow in such a way that they all work together.
Yeah, you got to figure out like how you're going to give something an interesting place in the plot, as well as a good win condition. Mission that's not just kill the flagship and the droid army gets blown up. Droid army dies, which is...
Though we will get into that.
Yeah. Oh, we will. I think let's kind of move on to kind of the next point, like challenges of sci-fi battles.
The research and execution. Because a lot of sci-fi takes its bases from things that already exist, it helps to know how the things that already exist work and why they were made. So, especially if you're coming up with like a different kind of futuristic weapon, and it's based on a modern weapon, it helps to look up the fictional weapon that you're using, especially if it is exactly that kind of weapon. It's like Yokai has Wizard Slayer, I think it is. Wow. And he uses a VP-70. And so, for the purposes of editing, I sent him a bunch of videos that have to do with the real-life VP-70 and some of the concerns that Wizard Slayer is going to have to overcome if he wants to use it as his primary weapon. There are a ton of different channels you can look at for how real-world weapons work and why some are preferred. It's like... Han Solo's blaster.
I think he actually uses the HK7. The VP-70 is a pistol. I think he uses the personal defense weapon. Sorry.
Well,
anyway,
but yeah, if you're gonna be using guns, then knowing how to maintain the gun is kind of important, no matter what kind of gun it is. Isn't that what you were going to say?
Yeah.
Not exactly. Like I was going to say with Han's blaster, it's commonly known that it's based off the Mauser. And while you might look at that just purely in terms of the Nazis who used it, in fact, the broom handle Mauser is actually a very commonly well-liked gun even today. Sure, it's kind of dated, but it's very effective for what it does, and it's still beloved for very good reasons. So
it also
a weapon that's handled a lot like that, yeah, because it doesn't jam. So
It can also go full auto
in the future.
It can also go full auto.
Yeah, it's a versatile little thing. So it makes sense that someone in a futuristic universe like Han would use a broom handle style weapon, even if it's a blaster instead of a slug propelled.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's also an aesthetic thing because part of the whole point of Star Wars was it was essentially World War II in space. So if you want to convey that,
yeah, but I don't think they were necessarily implying that Han was a Nazi.
No, but it is aesthetically a World War II style weapon.
Kind of like how the Walter PPK kind of is very much associated with World War II.
Yeah.
And the Beretta with Vietnam, and the Glock with like modern civilian carry and law enforcement. Because cops can have battles too.
Yeah.
I would say also part of the problem with science fiction battles, the challenges is bad application. So, for example, we talked a little bit earlier about how the entirety of the U.S.'s military equipment is made by the lowest bidder. So we always seem to like assume that in sci-fi everything is clean and like fantastic and works super well, but it's kind of an underappreciated element that like Alien captured this fairly well, where everything is like functional enough, and that's what you get because we're not spending more money on you.
Well,
we're running a business here.
That was kind of Star Wars too, at least in the first movie, where they had the Falcon always.
What a hunk of junk!
Yeah.
I have a sneaking theory about The Last Jedi, where the reason that the bombers are so idiotically retarded is because they were also built by the lowest bidder.
I suppose so.
Yeah. It would not surprise me. But the whole
Yeah.
thing with that is, why would you use those when you have something that is faster?
Yeah,
And
the main
more
problem
accurate.
with those, the main problem with those is that it just seemed like it's coming from an attitude of a lack of understanding in military tactics. Because you mainly, if somebody is big, you try to give it big thrusters, especially if it's in space. And you give it higher armor if it's a land vehicle. And it seems as though the bombers were made with the intention of making them land vehicles, but they were changed into being space vehicles.
They were also made with the lack of understanding that momentum exists and that friction doesn't exist in space. So why would they be so slow if all you need to do
Yeah,
is
and
accelerate it more?
they were
Or if you could just launch them at them with light speed, but that's a completely different conversation.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
were modeled after a very specific plane that is no longer used for a very good reason.
I think it was the B-29 Super Fortress, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that's exactly
Yeah.
what it was. But there's a very good reason why Lucas didn't do something like that himself. He went for the smaller things that were more maneuverable, and for very good reason.
And it's also because like, first of all, why wouldn't you be able to just shoot those bombs out of like a magnetic accelerated cannon or something like that?
Yeah,
I understand that we're going for the whole like it's supposed to look like World War II, but you also have to take into consideration that you essentially brought the equivalent of like battleships, except they're like souped up to the nth degree. So it's not like you could, like, if you have like something that's like 30 times the size of a battleship and like 10 times the armor, you're not going to be able to sink it with like a normal sized bomber.
No, you're not.
Yeah, the bombers just strike me as a lack of proper information, because you could have the bomber and you could make it work, but you still have to do some work to communicate stuff to the audience. Maybe it was a case where it was the lowest bidder built it. Maybe it was a case where it's like it wasn't even said that it was magnetic.
Or if they had to jerry-rig a land or an in-planet attack vehicle into a space
an atmospheric attack vehicle had to be reconfigured into a space attack vehicle. But to do that, you need to actually communicate these things. It can still work as a concept if you just explain why the concept works narratively.
But don't the rebels have that gigantic ass ship that's like
the Radis?
The Radis, yeah, isn't that like why would they have to jury-rig these tiny bombers if you have the technology to construct and or have possession of such a gigantic ship?
Who knows? I have no idea what the Radis is capable of. They didn't actually say it.
It's never gone into, and the Radis ends up being
so like, was the Radis
used
even
as
armed?
a trireme anyway. So
the overarching problem here that I seem to see in sci-fi is then why wouldn't you just problem?
Yeah.
That's like, here's a thought for if you're in a writing room: have two writers. One represents one faction and one represents another. If they're gamers, all the better, because it reinforces what I'm about to get into. One person pitches an idea, and then the other person goes, okay, here's what I'm going to do to counter it. And then the other guy, here's what I do to counter that. And then it's a counter game in the planning stages of your setting, and that can emulate what it's like for the different factions to be planning how they make their weapons by using them to counter each other in this giant Lensman arms race in space. And if you have your writers thinking in that way, you can have it paralleled and have it be even more word. You know what I'm getting for. What I'm going for, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Where it's like mirrored in both respects.
Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah. And if you have more than one person in the writer's room, but not, say, 15, because 15 is way too many people in the kitchen, get out, please. If you have 2 or 3, 5 at the very most, you can have people point out, yeah, that's not going to work because these reasons. And then, well, if they still want to make it work, then they have to come up with a creative way to make it work. Instead of just going, oh, this is the shot I want to use, and this is the reason why, when the reason why doesn't fit.
Mm-hmm.
Because hyperspeed ramming broke the back of the lore.
Mm-hmm. Especially like when, like, that's another problem that might occur is you do not want to give either side a nuke.
No.
It's even worse than that because Muller brought that up in his giant 4.5 hour rant on Last Jedi, where he theorized that you could use X-Wings to essentially ram the Death Star. And then it was his comment section that pointed out, you don't even have to do that. You just need to strap a hyperspace drive to a flagpole and you'll essentially get the same effect with a hyperspace missile. You can have a missile that can blow up the Death Star. So this is why you need multiple people thinking on that. One person has an idea and another person expands on it. This is how actual weapons development works. So it helps to mirror that in fiction.
And then
just have somebody build on your ideas.
And then if somebody has like something of extreme destructive force on their side, especially if it's been sitting there for a while and they've been in a tense situation, it's very, very unsatisfying when it comes out. It's more satisfying if somebody is trying desperately to find something and they figure it out with the resources they have. Like if they like say, oh, that's too dangerous, and they just kind of like figure out a way to jerry-rig something. It's kind of a cliche, but it works.
If there's no setup, then it feels like an ass pull.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You wanted to have this chase, and then you also wanted to have the battle end this way, but you didn't care how those two connected.
Yeah, you can't have... Oh, how did we get on this? That's good.
Yeah. Well, it's like we're talking about sci-fi.
Well,
yeah.
I suppose it works. If you want to have a space chase, then don't make it 2 hours long.
I think you could have a 2-hour-long space chase. It just has to be done correctly. You can do anything you want, just do it right.
Yeah, but you have to make it. You have to make it exciting.
I think with that, you need to have like obstacles in the way of it,
rather than just a purple-haired lesbian saying no. You have to keep running.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you what we're doing.
Or you have like obstacles in the way of the ships rather than just floating in empty space. Which is, and I think that.
And for the love of God, please do not ever bring up fuel consumption.
Unless it is, unless you are Star Trek. Star Trek has done fuel consumption stuff well. And usually fuel consumption does not work in a chase necessarily, unless you are actively making acrobatic maneuvers and you're trying to have to do the math. Usually fuel consumption type plots work well in terms of a bottle episode where somebody's like becalmed out in space or something.
Yeah, but my point is more of, if the franchise has never ever mentioned fuel consumption before, you probably shouldn't do it.
Technically,
and it
KOTOR
probably
2 had
wouldn't
fuel.
even work.
The entire part
I
of the
think
thing you go to Nar Shaddaa to do is to get fuel for Paragus and Kodor too.
I think like you shouldn't like I think like kind of that goes to a general thing. Don't throw elements into something because you think it'll be cool. You have to plan it out and figure things out. Is that a correct assumption, Neph?
Yes.
And also,
Yes.
don't invent something just to get someone out of a situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those. God, I hate those. Those are so unsatisfying.
Or to get them into a situation.
Yeah, that's even worse.
Like where I think like Sword of Truth has this problem over and over and over again, like to the point where I was just reading the first 5 books. The plot structure of every book is exactly the same. It is plot for a little bit, doesn't really have much to do with the central conflict, then Deus Ex Machina, then slight denouement, then the next book is meandering plot with some consequences from the Deus Ex Machina from the last one, then another Deus Ex Machina to fix it, and then denouement, and then follow up from Deus Ex Machina, then another Deus Ex Machina to fix it.
It's one thing for it to be pulps, where it's to churn things out fast, but
if they're really long novels like Terry Goodkind, like they're thick books. They're like they're like 3 inches, like 2 inches thick or something.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah. And they're like 700 pages or something. They're like really long, but there's just so little plot there. It's like, okay, and then you just end it with a Deus Ex Machina. It's just like, huh? But yeah. I actually gotta go, but I think we've kind of covered a lot of really good stuff here, both in general and specific stuff. Was there anything that y'all wanted to kind of just chat about for the last, like, say 9 minutes or something? Like, kind of in this as a summation, I guess.
Well, battles do make it easy to communicate plot points and things.
And
did we really go into the win condition before?
I think like the win condition where it's kind of unsatisfying, where it's just like generally like usually in a lot of cases the easiest solution is to, like, I think, like as you were saying, like the Joss Whedon, the Avengers, the Phantom Menace, the Game of Thrones season 8 thing, where you kill the head baddie or some element of the thing and the whole thing ends. Admittedly, I am kind of guilty of doing this, but I made it really, really hard. I just made it really hard in Queen of Spring, where I just had the bad guys face the good guys over and over again. They tried really, really hard 3 or 4 times, and they just can't kill this guy. They have to figure out some really clever win conditions in order to beat him.
Not exactly what I was talking about. I was more talking about the win condition of the battle. I think I briefly mentioned stuff like this about how kill them all isn't really an appropriate way to decide who wins the fight. And I mentioned things like breakthroughs. It's like holding a line can be a win condition. The important thing in any battle, if there is a battle that is going to happen, both sides need to know what they're trying to specifically achieve in that fight. And then everything that you do in that fight should contribute to that win condition. So if you're trying to get around somebody, you should try getting through flanking moves, have certain feints to drag the opponent off in one direction so you can slip past. You should try to send like a really heavy bruiser to break a light part in the line so that you have a access point to get through. Your actions should contribute to how your faction's actions should contribute to how they intend to go about winning and what they want to do. And a lot of that, I complained about this big time in the Battle of the Bastards stream. It's like I saw two factions slamming into each other and had no real idea who was winning at any given time because they didn't know what they were trying to do.
Since just killing all of the opponent is not a very good strategy.
No.
Especially since the entirety of the protagonist's battle plan was abandoned because one person died.
You do not abandon a strategy just because one person dies.
Oh, one person died? I guess the only thing that's going to keep us from all dying isn't worth it anymore. I would say with regards to any elements, but we'll say specifically with regards to battles, so like magic, creatures, whatever like equipment the people are using, and this applies to both science and science fiction and fantasy. The efficacy with which a tool is used is defined by the clarity with which it is determined by the clarity with which it is defined. So you need to understand what the tool is used for, how it's used. If there's any things similar to that in reality, you need to understand how that works and how the thing you're using is different and how that cascades to the other elements that you have. You need to understand exactly how the thing that you are using works and whether or not you should be using that or something else. Why wouldn't you just? You need to understand what tools are available in your toolbox. You're not going to use a screwdriver when you have or maybe you would if you need a screw, but if you have a power drill, why the hell would you be using a screwdriver? And also, why would you be using it to hammer something?
That too. And let's see, what did I want? I had a point. Now I've forgotten it.
It's okay.
Oh, right. And if you have a magic system, you had better know exactly what your magic does, how it's used, and what it can and cannot do before you start writing. Because when people start asking questions, if you don't have an answer, they're gonna start going, oh, so it can do this and this and this and this. When in reality, it probably can't.
I would say that you... Go ahead.
I.e., the Force is being treated as a catch-all when it's got some pretty strict rules in reality.
I would say that you can change anything as you go. You don't have to have everything all planned out ahead of time, but you have to understand that you have to A, understand when you're changing something, and B, you have to understand that when you change something, what else it affects.
Yeah.
Also, also figuring out like if there are new conditions that you need to account for,
and
like
why?
say with Wheel of Time, you can figure out like you can kind of introduce new stuff, but there are limitations around it, and if you don't follow certain rules, you're going to die. Or if you experiment with stuff that is like far beyond your control, you're gonna die.
Yeah, and there are differences between different magic systems. There are soft magic systems, and then there are hard magic systems. The Force was a hard magic system before Disney got their claws into it. Now it's a soft magic system, and they don't get that they can't just do that.
Mm-hmm. There's also kind of the issue of like you need to be very, very I think that Brandon Sanderson actually put it well, where he said like the ability for a person to use magic to solve a problem in a story is directly proportional with how well the audience understands the magic.
Yes.
Yeah, metal bending. Great example of that sort of thing. Because how metal bending works in Avatar: The Last Airbender, you're not literally bending metal. You're an earthbender with the power to bend the minerals in the alloy that you're bending.
Yeah.
So that was actually a very clever workaround.
Like stuff like and that's why platinum is so useful against earthbender or metal benders, because the metal is so refined that they can't really do anything to it.
And don't forget the blood bending too.
Yeah, where it's like
To realize
the
there's
trace
water in
elements.
things.
Yeah.
And mud bending, the like vine bending that was sort of water bending offshoots.
That's an example of then why wouldn't you just, except used properly?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Because it's like individuals in certain environments or individuals in massive desperation.
Alrighty.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been really fun. I've really enjoyed this. This has been a good stream, and I really like preparing for it as well.
Yep, it was fun.
You promised
Yeah.
that I would get to talk about guns, and you didn't, and you delivered on that promise.
I'm very glad that I was able to keep that.
Daka.
Alrighty. Well, thank you to my lovely guests and the best chat ever. Thank you. Thank you, Neph Champion, Drake the Duelist, and Brent Discord. I've greatly appreciated having you come on and share your insights about battles and other fun things relating to writing.
Thanks for having us.
Yes,
yeah, and
thank you very much.
And hopefully people find this stream helpful in terms of like trying to think outside the box and figuring out like what pitfalls might befall like you writing a battle. That's my hope.
Yep.
And I hope we taught you a thing or two about how to get sidetracked.
Yeah.
Yeah, that too. We always seem to get sidetracked at least a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you all very much. I will see you all later. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.